Welcome to the 37%. This is a show that invites people to reflect on a significant career, leadership, or life decision. My name's Anya Maguire.
And my name is Susie Kenefick.
On our show, we ask our guests about what led to a decision, why they made it, how it was made, and what happened next.
Okay, well, Anya, how are you today?
Oh, good today, Susie. How are you?
Good, yeah. Well, I'm very well. And we're going to, in a moment, listen to our guest, Giles. He's going to tell us a little bit about his big decision, which I think, interestingly, in this case, was almost a non-decision. It was a decision not to do something. Would you agree with that?
I would. And I think that's really fascinating because we make so many decisions all the time in an unconscious way. So not deciding, as we often say, is also a decision. So let's get listening to Giles, will we?
Yeah, there'll be plenty to unpack afterward, no doubt. But let's dive into to the interview.
Brilliant.
So today we're talking to Giles Vardy. Giles is a coach and mentor who works closely with board-level directors, senior executives and management teams. Giles came to the second career in coaching following his retirement from a long career in finance in the City of London. Over the years, Giles has held a number of high-profile directorships, including a period on the board of the London Stock Exchange. Following his retirement, Giles commenced a master's degree in coaching and behavioural change. And Giles draws on his vast and varied experience in his coaching work, focusing on guiding people through the transition from working life to retirement and on into new careers. Giles, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Susie.
Giles, it's lovely to have you. I'm really looking forward to hearing about your decision. But before we get into that, just give us a bit of background, 4 or 5 bullet points on, who you are now.
Who I am now? Well, that's interesting. I suppose the idea of retirement at the age of 65 is something which has gone out the window. And a lot of people now, professionally certainly, are working much longer into their 70s. And you read about retailers finding that older people tend to handle customers better than younger people and so on. So there's been a renewal in older people. Myself, as I mentioned, I was thinking of retiring in my early 60s. And then I felt because so many colleagues and friends contacted me to say, could I have a coffee or a lunch with you? And then they would pour out their problems. They didn't like their boss. What is the meaning of life? Some of them often professionally work very hard, like lawyers, and suddenly in their 50s or 60s, suddenly said, is that it? And often the answer to that question was, yes, that's it. And people hadn't prepared for the fact that their third phase of life is coming at them rather faster than they thought. So from my point of view, I'm now someone who I want to keep mentally active. It's very important to use it or lose it. And I think the idea of playing golf 5 days a week, not that I'm a golfer because I'm not, doing something idle for 4 or 5 days a week is just not good enough. And it's quite clear that people, if they don't use their brains, start to lose their faculties. And so, all of us are terrified of being sent to an old folks home and put in front of a TV set because you will go bonkers. And so the need to maintain stimulation of your brain, or your curiosity, I think is the word I would use, is vital. And I think curiosity is something which I think the world at my age falls into 2 types, those who are curious and those who are not. And I have a lot of contemporaries who kind of know what they know and they don't want to know anymore.
And you are?
I'd like to think I'm curious. I do understand what blockchain means. I do understand that cryptocurrencies are actually outrageous. And I want to understand artificial intelligence. I want to understand the impact these have on society. And although human nature doesn't change that much, we are evolving, but it is the technology and the habits and performance and the way people behave has changed. And that's very interesting to me.
So I suppose it sounds like the decision we're going to talk about, and I think this is how you characterise it, is the decision not to retire. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. I did actually look at retirement. And a friend of mine who was a very successful lawyer said, oh, yes, I've taken up woodworking and come and meet my woodworking chums and so on. And we went to this workshop. I was about 61 years old. And they were a delightful group of people and this very dashing character who ran the workshop. And I thought, well, no, they all see. And I used to love, my father was a very keen carpenter and DIY specialist. And I used to watch him with his lathes and things when I was a boy. And I thought, well, this is okay. We went home to his family home and had a cup of tea with his wife. And she gave me a very long look and said, do you really want to do this, Giles? She said, look around you. And the house was stuffed with little stools and little pine tables and things. She said, I don't know where to put this stuff. And I suddenly thought she had a point, actually. There are only so many little three-legged stools and cabinets and tables you can make before you drive your other half insane.
So you looked down the barrel of the retirement gun and turned back the other way.
Yeah, I mean, two things. One is obviously I'm fortunate that I managed to make a bit of money in my career, so one had financial resources to retire reasonably comfortably. And the other thing, of course, is one's personal health. A lot of people, if they have a chronic condition, obviously retirement is less of an attractive proposition. But I found increasingly, as I said, there were two types of contemporaries of mine, those who were curious and those who weren't. The ones who are curious tend to still be working, funny enough.
Interesting. Why do you think that is?
Because I think in the end, when I remember earlier in my career, and I joined the board of the London Stock Exchange when I was in my mid-30s. And I'm afraid it was largely male members of the board. There were two female members. But they're all in their sort of 60s and one or two in their early 70s, which when you're in your 30s, these people look terribly old. And they'd all been obviously quite successful. And I suddenly realised, certainly talking to one or two of them, having a villa in Spain or Portugal or whatever is all very nice. But actually, it's much more fun sitting on the board of the stock exchange than sitting drinking sangria. And they enjoyed the stimulation and the challenge in their 70s. So I suddenly thought, well, there must be something to this. I think the answer is the curiosity is something you have to satisfy. You can't be curious and not do anything about it.
A lot of what you're saying, Giles, sounds a little bit to me like the idea of the growth mindset, that some people believe they can learn about new things and they can develop their skills, and some people, I suppose, just inherently don't. And do you think that aging has an impact on that for people, that they become maybe a little less curious as they get older, or do you think that's a factor?
I can only speak anecdotally, Susie, on that. I'm sure there's research, but I think people do get set in their ways. And, all human beings are creatures of habit, but some of those habits become more, more rigid, perhaps, when they get older. And there are some people who, they feel like their sort of social pioneering days are over. They don't need to make new friends or meet new people. And they're happy with their lot. Which is fine. It's probably a good thing, actually, if you're not adventurous and you don't want to meet new people. But I think, yes, there are certainly people I know, my contemporaries, who have become a little bit more rigid. But for every one of those that is a bit more rigid, there are those who are still very active and doing interesting things. An old friend of mine is a politician. He's still very active in politics. And has no intention of packing up as long as he's still in demand and can do effective things as a politician or a business person.
So after you had that brush with retirement and you decided, no, I'm not going to inflict a lot of stools and cabinets on my wife, not only did you actually not retire, but you actually chose to go back into education, which really does demonstrate your inherent curiosity. So maybe you could tell us a bit about that and how that came about.
I think it was, as I mentioned earlier, where a lot of former colleagues get back in touch. They wanted a reference for a job, or they wanted to have a chat about where they got to. And there was one particular individual who made a major change to his lifestyle, in fact, as a result, who sat down and we spent a long time. And eventually I said to him, I think I'm going to have to charge you some money for this. The amount of wisdom I was imparting to him. And he laughed. And actually, I was telling a friend of mine about this, and he said, well, why don't you get professional training? If you want to advise people and mentor them, you need to understand kind of the theory, or at least some of the neuroscience and psychological trends and themes behind these people's thoughts. And that struck me as something that would make me more effective. And at the same time, I wanted to do more of it. And if you have a certain level of training behind that, you're facilitating the ability to do more of that. And yes, there's a helping the people. It's also actually trying to match up one's understanding of your own career with people's careers as they look out to the future. And I felt very strongly that if I had that training as well, I could do more of what was something I seemed to enjoy doing.
What was it like for you to put yourself in the position of going back to do training and education, having had a very distinguished career and having amassed a lot of knowledge?
Well, it was a bit of a shock, actually. The first thing was I hadn't written an essay in 40 years, and that was a little bit of a challenge. And an awful lot was hanging off Professor Google rather than going to the library and thumbing through old paper books and so on. But I was very fortunate. The group of people I was with were a very varied and wonderfully different bunch of people. So I think all of us felt a little bit nervous to start with as to how it was going to work out the course. But actually, I felt quite comfortable quite quickly because the material was interesting, and everyone was coming at it with a fairly fresh perspective. They weren't, everyone had a different view of what they wanted out of the course. And that in itself made it interesting. So the sort of coffee break conversations were very good, actually, with my fellow students. And although I had a bit too much grey hair compared to the rest of them, and it is my hair, it's not glued on, I promise, I felt it was something where they were interested in my experiences, but I was also interested in their attitudes to things that were happening and how people develop over time. Because all of us may have the same personalities, but the way we just deploy those personalities may change over time or change because of the role we're doing.
And what did you learn about yourself through that process that maybe you didn't know before?
I think two things, Susie. One was I didn't feel constrained by the course. I actually enjoyed doing it, and I felt I was myself. Where I like entertaining people, but I'm also serious. And one of the things I learned from when I was a young person, I took up rowing at school. I was very fortunate. I enjoyed rowing, and you discover that you had to learn to trust people in a crew if you were rowing in a crew. But you didn't have to like them. And there's always an assumption that you need to like someone to trust them and vice versa. Well, all of us have relatives, I'm sure, that we like, but we wouldn't trust them with a €1 coin and vice versa. So often you could be working with people and certainly on the course. You didn't perhaps particularly like their personalities, but they certainly had some very interesting things to say. But I found that quite interesting. It was a reinforcement to some of my views, but also, I think I learned two things most important to me, which in the city, you had to judge people by how they behaved and their appearance. And that's very old-fashioned. And I found on the course, you could mistake and get it terribly wrong with people by judging them by their appearance and how they'd supported themselves. So my insight there was never judge a book by its cover.
Well, it sounds like the rules have changed quite a bit since your career started, and that maybe that education you did, it was educating you as to what the new rules are or changing your outlook. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would. And I think that's a good thing, actually.
Yeah. Was it uncomfortable at any point?
No, not really. Human beings underneath it all are fairly similar. And people who are difficult personalities, for example, there's always something about them where if you probe enough or converse with them enough, you'll find out something about them.
Having made the decision not to retire, the decision not to do something is just as momentous as the decision to do something. You then launched yourself into a kind of, sounds like a voyage of discovery. You rewired yourself. You opened up your mind. What happened then?
I was very fortunate. I had an individual who I'd met. He was now my business partner, who's a much younger person than me, and he'd done a similar coaching course. And we'd met through a mutual contact, and he specialises in sales training, but not door-to-door sales. But this is like big ticket contracts, like $1 billion outsourcing contracts. How do you walk into a chief executive or a chairman's office and pitch for something as big as that? And we discovered that actually between the two of us, we could work together where often the senior management of the company he was coaching didn't understand the sales function and had their own challenges. And so often, I was just doing it yesterday, one of his clients, I'm now coaching the chief executive who's just decided he really hasn't got all the skills he needs to do the job. He's very good on certain aspects, but not on others. So that works really well, and I enjoy the work. It's not full time, which is fine. So if people say to me, "Are you retired?" I say no, but I'm not working full time. But I do spend a long time reflecting about how to deal with my clients, and I have a number of female clients in particular who, if they think there's a glass ceiling, are very keen to get through it, and also highly ambitious. And I find female clients in particular really interesting because they have a very varied set of skills, which are often very different from their male counterparts. And helping them to kind of understand the game, if I can call it that, is a really satisfying experience. And one of them has been promoted twice in the last 3 years and has got to the level where she wanted to reach. And that in itself is very satisfying, not because I've helped her get there on her own, just that I've been a little bit of a catalyst for some of her thinking, which has been really satisfying.
Oh, it sounds like after your first career, which was more about your own success, your second career is really, you're getting a lot of joy and energy from other people's success.
Yeah, I think what you learn, there's a kind of actuarial shape to your career. In your 20s and 30s, you tend to be an action person. You want to get things done. If you're a salesperson, you want the deal, or if you're a young professional, you want to perform well and move up the ladder. By the time you get to your 40s, it's more about judgment and can you judge people correctly, particularly if you're a senior manager. And it's not so much you going and doing things, it's getting the right people in the right slots to perform. And certainly in your 50s and 60s, I always advise people to maintain your curiosity, which is what we talked about already. And it's in that process that people who have good judgment become very successful. And one of my colleagues when I worked at a bank, he was a middle-level financial controller in our 30s, a very good one. He ended up chairman of a FTSE 100 company. But you'd never know that when you met him. But why? Because he's smart, doesn't offend people are comfortable with him, and he has very good judgment and has had a very successful career. But if you met him in the street, you wouldn't know he was like that at all. So the other thing that's so important is the intangibles of one's careers. People get promoted because your colleagues are comfortable with you, not because you're the top producer or you're the best person. And comfort is a very difficult thing to explain. It's not in the managerial textbooks.
Yeah, I mean, you talked there about the kinds of skills people have in early stages of their career versus in the later stages, and I actually think there is some neuroscience evidence that bears that out. That the kind of intelligence that you have in your 20s and 30s is about being dynamic and, as you say, energetic and getting you places. But then as you move into middle age and beyond, it's more about that holistic way of looking at things and about judgment and different skills. And maybe this idea of what got you here won't get you there. And I'm just wondering how you see that play out with clients and how they, manage that transition from the very dynamic stages of their career to the later, more, as you say, that kind of comfort stage.
Yes. Well, I wouldn't call it a comfort stage, actually, Susie, because one of the skills about judgment, if you take judgment as a sort of overall category, there are subsets like timing, for example. And when you're an action-orientated young person, and certainly when I was a chief executive, you would have young people come into your office and say, we need to get this done now, and I need a decision now, and it's absolutely essential. Bang, 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 we get it done. And I look at them and say, I don't think it is important we need to make a decision now. Why don't we leave it for a couple of weeks and see how it pans out? And of course, they look at you as some lazy, fat, middle-aged so-and-so who doesn't want to get off his backside and do something. And guess what? Within 2 weeks, there was no need to make a decision about this. It all faded away.
What do you think you've learned about yourself or about life or what's important in this second career that you've had?
It's all about the people. And if you don't know how to manage the people, you won't succeed in your career, whatever your career choice is, or for that matter, your retirement choice. Because I think the more senior you become, particularly, it's all about the people. And when you look at historical events, it all boils down to personal relationships in the end. When Margaret Thatcher came back from Moscow and said to Reagan, we can do business with Gorbachev, that started the whole end of the Cold War. It was a personal relationship that started it. I'm not saying she did it single-handed, but the process that was kicked off. So in answer to your question, the answer is more important to understand the people and deal with people and handle them correctly and try and disport yourself in a reasonable way. Because rather like the Bible, he who lives by the sword shall die by the sword. If you treat people well, I think by and large you get treated well back.
What does that mean for you?
I enjoy people's company. I enjoy good fellowship in the broadest sense.
And this second career gives you that?
To a certain extent, yes. I mean, I have clients I started looking after 6 years ago who still ring me up and have a chat, and or they want to tell me how they're getting on, or even how am I getting on? And that's quite nice to have that kind of relationship. In the city, I had maybe 3 clients who I kept in touch with on a friendly level because we'd done business together. But I found on the coaching side, because it's much more personal and much more focused, I think, one in particular rang me the other day and said, actually, I do think you changed my life because I now have got the lifestyle I want. I've arranged my career the way I wanted it, and I'm with my family rather than being away from my family. Thanks a lot. And when people say thank you, it's really quite touching because in most careers, no one ever says thank you to you.
And with those clients who you coach and mentor, when it comes to their decision making in their careers and in their lives by extension, what do you think are the big obstacles for them in getting to where they need to go?
Often it's other people. It's colleagues who perhaps don't recognise their skills or are not comfortable with them, as we were saying earlier. And how do you persuade someone who's not comfortable with you to be comfortable with you? Very difficult. Sometimes that's impossible, can't be done. But I think also it's understanding motivation of people too. A lot of people don't take time to find out what motivates people. You talk to anybody, I used to find even in business, just say, so tell me about what you do. People love talking about their jobs. They love talking about themselves. But no one spends the time to listen to them. And I think it's rather like the politicians now who have to have instant response to every issue. I would applaud any politician who, when asked a question by a journalist, saying, I'd like some time to think about that before I answer that question. And they think they're going to get slated for doing it, but I would say at last someone's reflecting and thinking about something.
And thinking about the future, what do you think the future holds for you in terms of career and this non-retirement that you've launched?
I think it's when I started out in the financial world in New York, the chairman of the company stood in front of all us trainees. I was a trainee. And he said, we expect everyone in this company to be current and competent. And I always thought that was quite a good encapsulation of what you would expect from the people who represent you in your firm. If I can't be current and competent with my clients, then I need to pack up. And I'm hoping that as long as I keep my marbles, I can be current and competent in helping them for a few more years yet. I think when I'm 90, I may not be as an effective coach as I am now in my late 60s. But you never know.
Well, what helps you stay current and competent?
Curiosity about world events. I still like to keep in touch with people I know from various businesses to find out what's going on. Certainly in technology businesses, if you look at the value of a company nowadays, it's not buildings, it's not inventory, it's brand, online presence, it's software, and the quality of the people that work for the company. Those are the intangible. I think 50% of the S&P 500 is intangible assets. And, one of them big intangible assets is your brand, your culture, your people. And I think, being curious about how you maintain the quality of your brand when you're so intangible is an interesting challenge. And I like talking to people about that. How do you do it? How do you keep your brand, at the right level?
We're coming to the end now, but one question we always ask is about, would you do it all the same way or would you do things differently looking back over your career?
One always has regrets. I probably made 1 or 2 decisions. My wife is convinced I should have been a lawyer. And I asked her why. She said, well, because you're very good at arguing with me. No, but on a serious note, I did actually originally apply to university to read law and then change my mind. I enjoyed the variety of my career. Some people who've done 20, 30 years in one particular company obviously got satisfaction and fulfillment from that. I got fulfillment from variety, doing different things and working in different industries, certainly at the board level. But they had their ups and downs. There was 2 or 3 jobs where I was on a hiding to nothing, and you just have to acknowledge the fact you're facing a brick wall and it's time to walk away. No one, life doesn't move in straight lines. And most of us have careers that are rather crab-like. We move from side to side and then move forward. But I think I've been fortunate in the sense that I've by and large enjoyed it. And when I reflect on the bits I really enjoyed, it was normally because of the people I was working with.
And I think with all that really varied experience, Giles, it does sound like you have a very unique vantage point from where you are now to look back on your career and also to assess the state of the workplace today, which, as you say, has changed dramatically and modernised in some ways. But also, it sounds like there are some sort of, fixed things that have remained the same. And I think it's important for us sometimes to return to those old-fashioned values. And as you say, that idea of being competent and current, the two qualities that somebody needs, I think, to succeed in the workplace. So it's a nice note maybe for us to conclude on. But thank you so much for coming in to talk to us today and telling us about your decision and, of course, your wealth of decision-making experience across your many and varied careers. And to wish you best of luck with your new venture.
Thank you very much, Susie. Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure.
Likewise. Wow, Susie, that was quite a tour de force. What do you make of that?
Great. Yeah, well, fascinating to get Giles's perspectives on that non-decision, as we called it, the decision not to retire. And there were a couple of things that really stood out for me in what he said there. The first one was around curiosity, and he used that word a lot, and mindset, I think. And I just think for lots of people, when it comes to, carrying on at a point when other people have maybe got to the end of their careers, it is essential to have curiosity. That's the thing that drives you forward. And making a decision like that to actually start a new career in later life, having that curiosity to go back into education, as he said, not having written an essay in 40 years, but being interested enough and motivated enough to learn new things at that age. I think that really just spoke a lot to his decision making process.
Yeah, I agree. I thought the really kernel of the story was the whole woodwork workshop situation, where he looked at a life with chums doing woodwork, and I think realised that he was of a mindset that wasn't going to be satisfied by that, and that he needed, for him to continue to be vital and to live in the way he'd lived, he needed things that were meaty, that were chunky, that he could get interested in. And curiosity, I think, is probably also a word for learning. And I think something that work does for us is learning. I mean, I often say to people when they tell me they're considering stopping work, I often say, well, who's going to help you to work out how to use the next mobile phone you have? Because often as you get older, it's a young person that you work with who tells you what the latest technology is or helps you with your printer or your mobile phone. And I think often we don't think about the consequences of not being around a mixed peer group, not being able to access other people's advice and insights into things like technology that might be not so interesting for us.
Yeah, I think when Giles told that story about the woodwork shop, it evoked for me that idea of a men's shed. I know that's quite a popular thing in this country, but he just decided that wasn't a fate that he was quite ready for. So yeah, I mean, the other thing that he talks about quite a lot, which I think will resonate with lots of people, is he's clearly somebody who does have quite a benevolent view of others. And he's worked in different roles over the years, and he's worked with people. He's been, as he said himself, in charge of a lot of people's careers. But he has a very positive view of people, I think. And that is something that obviously is vital to his work as a coach and mentor. But, when you have spent your entire career being with people, making decisions collectively and having that social contact and being responsible for people, which he clearly was very comfortable with doing in some of those really big roles that he had. It spoke a lot to his values for me, that he is somebody who believes in the basic goodness and benevolence in people and in their potential. And he just wasn't ready to step away from being involved with people, to having that social interaction and to helping people. I think that is also something that speaks to his values. And that probably says something to me as well about how he makes decisions. It is a lot about it's values led, and it is about being in service to people.
I think being in service to people is very important. I think that's what, when you are in a professional job, that is the case. I always like in America, when someone introduces themselves to you, they always say, I serve on the board of, or I serve in my company. And I think that idea of service is something that is part of being in the wider human community that we're all in, that we're all serving each other by taking up the cudgels and knowing bits and pieces about things that are important to all of us. So I really like that idea. I thought, I was reflecting there when you were talking there, and I was thinking a lot of his, he emphasized relationships, the personal touch and how important that was. And I thought he made an interesting point about how maybe we've kind of lost that in the sort of, fuzz of technology that we operate in now. But for me, what that came from really, and maybe the decision not to stop working, came from an incredible sense of confidence that maybe has come from success. And the benefit of having a successful career is one does have confidence. And maybe at a decision point where he could have said, I'm done with that, he had the confidence to continue on in a new career because he'd had such a fulfilling and successful career before that. What would you say?
Yeah, that actually struck me as well. And obviously this is a podcast about decision making, so we do have to comment on the flavour of decision that we're seeing with our guests. And I think in this case, what was quite clear is that he isn't somebody who is beset by fears and doubts when it comes to his decision making. And that may be a feature of his experience and having been in these very, very senior and high profile roles. But he is somebody who has conviction, and he's somebody who goes with his gut, and I think is quite confident in executing his judgment around how he makes decisions, which, we've seen with different people, and we will see with different people that we talk to on the podcast. That's not always the case. So it's just something worth reflecting on, I think, the role that conviction and confidence plays in people's decision making, because not everyone has that and not everybody can have that, but it is probably something worth trying to cultivate if you want to be a more effective decision maker.
I agree. And I think you've just brought out another point, which was his decisiveness. And maybe that does come from having a career as a banker where you've got to decide things fairly quickly. And it's maybe quite a factual decision-making process you go through. But I think he made decisions quickly, decisively, firmly. And as you point out, kind of gut decisions. They weren't decisions that he sat down and analysed with a bit of paper. He didn't write pros and cons, although he talked about doing that. He knew what the pros and cons were, and he just went for it. And maybe that does come from the confidence, as we said, or maybe that's just a knowing yourself and knowing in your gut what's right for you.
Absolutely. And as a millennial, obviously, I have the very unfortunate reality to face that I'm never going to be able to retire. So I am very glad
not sure about that.
To take Giles's advice with me in my stead, that as long as I remain current and competent, I never have to pack up my working shoes. So with that, maybe we can come to a close.
Yeah. Thanks, Susie. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Anya. Thank you for listening to the 37%. If you want to know more about us, what we do, and how we might be able to help you with a key decision you're considering, check out our website at www.persuasion.ie.